Hello and welcome to Unacademy. As part of your Hindu analysis today, we'll be discussing 6 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. As it's a Friday paper, there's not a lot of articles which are quite relevant for the examination, but we've been able to identify 6 very interesting articles for you generally. But before we begin, as always, the 24,999 offer is on. If you've ever considered a 15th month's subscription for Unacademy, this is the right time for that. We have a batch coming on 8th of July, so I hope you will become a part of this also. Other than that, you would know that we've already gone through the 4 sessions of Conquer Mains which were planned on YouTube, with economics with Shyam sir, then Mukesh sir took geography, then science and technology with Hima Bindu ma'am, and yesterday I took a session for history where we discussed the establishment of British Raj and the issues and conceptual aspects around it. Now today, Sarmat sir is going to be live at 10 PM in the night on this channel. So if you haven't subscribed, you should. And more than that, he will be discussing polity related issues for the mains examination. And the last session will be on Saturday with Chetan sir discussing international relations. After this, we will move to the app where you would have to enroll into this program. The enrollment link is given in the description box. If there's any issue, you can always comment on that. And over and above that, you have to enroll. The course price as of right now is only 999, which is close to 1,000 rupees. And this may be a game changer for your preparation generally. So if you've ever considered, again, mains level preparation understanding, this is the program for you in that regard. With this, let's discuss the question which I gave you yesterday, which is which of the following pollutants is not included in the calculation of AQI as per the Central Pollution Control Board guidelines. The answer here is very simply arsenic, ozone, nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide all are part of the AQI. A very important, interesting question. You can make it in 2 different ways where you can have considered the following 1, 2, 3, 4. Which of the following are part of the AQI? You can make multiple combinations. So do remember these. We had a discussion about this yesterday. So I hope you were a part of that also. With this, let's look at the 6 topics for today. Mostly a GS paper 3 oriented discussion with computer literacy and the idea of how India needs to reboot it. Then we'll talk about the climate agenda, what the new government should have, an article which gives you a certain understanding, certain key terminologies. Then from the archives, a very interesting article about invasive species. We'll understand the static here. So we use the current affairs here to enter into the static. And thereafter, we'll talk about the PLI scheme also. And we'll end with 2 very interesting but small articles, which is the issues which we are facing at our ports. And last but not the least, a gharial, lone gharial, single gharial, lone female. She's there in the Kaziranga National Park. And the idea is this should end soon because gharials need to be reintroduced in Assam. Again, we'll talk about the gharial IUCN status and other aspects related to the crocodile family itself in India. So this is the agenda for the next 1 hour. Let's start our discussion with computer literacy in India needs a reboot. Now, let's be very honest. The exact definition of computer literacy does not do justice to the importance of it, which is the knowledge and the ability to use computers and technology effectively. And the idea is that COVID-19 exposed in a way a lot of Indians to the digital world if they were previously not a part of it, with regards to vaccines, to anything and everything from groceries to everything. Digital world became very, very important. And to be very clear, we are in the digital era, and in the digital era, computer literacy is extremely necessary and important. And more than that, there's a lot of what we call as roadblocks which can be created for you if you don't have the understanding of a computer. The fact that we are having this conversation right now is through the digital means itself, and therefore the digital era is based on the literacy of computers, that our Indians understand the concept of computers, more than that, using applications on them, using apps. The mobile and computer interface sometimes is different. A lot of people do understand how to operate a mobile but not a computer. But the computer literacy word includes the larger concept of using any form of computer, and therefore when we go through the data which was given by the National Sample Survey, the number is quite discouraging and alarming. wherein as of right now, for 2020-21, the computer literacy in India stands at 24.7% for individuals above 15 years, which is that ways a very dismal number, which is 70% of Indians in that regard have no idea about how to use a computer. Now, this data is actually not doing justice to the what we call as internal mechanisms of computer literacy. That is what we'll try to understand. See, computer literacy is the knowledge and the use of computer should be fine. But there are three things which you need to understand. What is the historical data? How does it compare to other sectors, and is there regional variation or age-wise variation? So the first thing which you should know is that according to 2017 NSS data, this number was at 18.4% and it has increased in 2021, which is the most reliable data we have. That is why the data mostly we use is 2020-21. Most NSS data is reliable for that period, and it has reached 24.7% that way. So for you the data does not matter, the trend matters, and therefore 24.7% of Indians have computer literacy. That way it has gone up. However, in between we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which also compelled a lot of people to learn these things, but fundamental ground level understanding is not something which has developed. However, this number is actually not really indicative of how India is. We have to see the rural India numbers and the urban India numbers, which is in rural India what is the literacy level and in urban India what is the literacy level. Now, if we go by that number, it was 11% in 2017 and it has become 18% in 2021, and according to the urban numbers, that is much higher, 34% and 39% between 2017 and 2021. Now, this means that this number is not truly indicative of the spread, because urban sector it is close to 40%. On the other hand, in rural sector, close to 80% of the people have no idea how to use a computer. Now, this shows a urban and rural divide which exists in India, which is quite important for your preparation for GS paper 3, that rural India and urban India need different types of approaches. The one size fits all approach is not going to work. So the divide is very, very clear here. But if I go a little bit more further, I will understand, or I will actually grasp a better picture of how actually computer literacy is even more skewed. See, there is a what is called a concept of generation effect. Generation effect, wherein there is a relationship between computer literacy and age. Basically, the higher you go in age, the computer literacy falls down. It's an inversely proportional relationship that way. And we also have data for that. For example, between 20 to 24 years of age, the computer literacy for the 2021 period data is close to 45%. But for 2021, if I take the data again and take it for specifically 60 to 65, it is 4%. There's a 10-time difference between the age brackets when it comes to 20 to 24 and 60 to 65. This is generational effect, as it is these men and women would have been born not in the digital era. They are now getting introduced to it. They may be using very rudimentary phones also. So that way, there's a generational effect in that sense. Now, when a Indian is in the bracket of 20 to 29, that is mostly the bracket in which they are looking for employment, they are looking for some form of livelihood, if you want to say, but mostly this is the most prime period for an Indian. The demographic dividend of India is in this bracket. Now, for 20 to 29 years, the data should be encouraging, because they are not in a way a part of the generational effect, but their data should be very indicative. However, unfortunately, it comes out to be 34%. Again, as I said, don't have to learn this data. I'll give you the conclusions out of this data, but please do try to understand how it is actually quite skewed and also problematic, which is that only 34% of Indians who are in the age bracket of 20 to 29 years looking for employment in their prime, they are the part of the most important part of the workforce. They do not have 70, close to 60 to 65% of Indians do not have an access to a computer, and even if they have an access, they have no idea whatsoever how to operate it. So from filling up forms, not everything can be done on a mobile, to going to, for example, into BPO jobs or jobs which are based on skill development or skill, 65% of Indians have no idea whatsoever. They are computer illiterate. This is not a good number. This is not a good number. For India in 2024, in the 21st century, this number should be much, much, much higher. Not even 50% of our youth is computer literate. And when I go a little bit further and I add the workforce, the most prime workforce between 20 to 29, 34% only know how to actually effectively use a computer. And if I go state-wise, I get an even more dangerous perspective about regional inequality and regional spread. For example, in Kerala, for 20 to 29 years, the percentage of computer literate people is 72%. This is the highest in that regard. But if I go to the other spectrum, it is 17% in Assam. It is even below the national average in the most important age group, not even affected by generation effect. And it's not that the other states are performing very good. If I go by the numbers, I have 20% for Bihar, I have 22% for UP, thereafter 21% for Jharkhand, and the data 25% for Odisha, thereafter 27% for Rajasthan, and 26% for Chhattisgarh. Again, this data is irrelevant, but you see they are all between 20 to 30%, which is again some of them being lower than the national average. So this is a very, very dangerous set of numbers which this article points out. That firstly, in the most prime, we don't have 65% of the people understanding a computer. State-wise, it is even more skewed, because in certain areas not even 20%, Assam 17%. Close to, on an average, 70 to 80% have no idea how to use a computer. Computer literacy is very low, and the urban and rural divide is also there. So there is a regional divide, there is a urban and rural divide, there is an age divide. So what is the conclusion of out of all this data? Then we'll try to understand the reasons and what is the way forward, as always. Now, the basic conclusions which we can draw from all of this data, which is more important for you to write in the examination. You obviously cannot remember each and every percentage or point. You can't do that. So the first conclusion is overall number or percentage is low. Overall number itself is low, which is 24.7%. This is very, very low vis-a-vis other developed countries and developing countries in that regard. Computer literacy very low. Then second, we have divides. We have three axes on which the divide is there. One is regional, the other one is age, and the more concerning is the divide in rural and urban. See, age is expected. Age is expected for generation effect, because not everybody is born in the same context. It will always be that case. From 45% for the 20 to 24 and 4% for 60 to 65. But the more problematic one is 72% in Kerala to 17% in Assam, and the idea that you have 18% in rural India and 34 to 35% in urban India. This is what needs to be addressed. This is what needs to be addressed. The idea that divides are created by systemic issues. And all this data is indicative of the fact that we have a regional divide, we have an urban rural divide, and we have an age divide. Now, what is the reason for this? What is the reason? So, all of this data can be then processed to give us this basic idea that from 72 to 17 and all between 20 to 30, and thereafter the rural to urban and generational effect. This is natural, this will be in all countries. However, in regional and urban rural, there is a little bit of more problematic aspect. So, the reason which is quoted in the article itself is at the school and college level, wherein they don't have two things. Some don't have infrastructure not there. On the other hand, some have the infra but no teachers or skilled personnel. So, most cases this is the one which is that there is no computer or practical solutions, and on the other hand, even if they have computers, there is no one to teach them. That is how you explain that 20 to 29 years dismal number of close to 34%, which is that in our school and college level itself, most of India, there is no access to computers, and if there is even access, there is also a emphasis. This is again a problem in our education system, which is an emphasis on theory and not practice, meaning that they have books which teach you everything, that click here, do this, do that. You would have also done it in your schools, but they do not have the practical equipment or computers itself. So, when this student is going to actually be exposed to a computer, he actually has no practical knowledge itself. He will not or she will not have any idea how to use that computer. They have seen a keyboard and a mouse, everything on in the books itself. They know how the cursor looks like. They know all of that. But when it comes in front of them, they have no idea whatsoever, because if theory is not put into practice, as it is useless. That is why we need to start early. So, the reason is that we are not trying to create a regime at the school, primary, secondary or higher secondary level where they basically can create, a certain practical environment in which they can learn the computers. So, the reasons are systemic to the education system itself, and with multiple schemes which are there has to be a scheme which at least pushes money into the government schools and the schools which are in rural India, that they get the infrastructure and also the teachers who can teach that to the children. Please be very clear about one thing, that the world is moving to the digital. We are talking about AI, we are talking about machine learning, we are talking about so many things. However, when it comes to application, ironically, 70% of India does not know what is AI and machine learning. Rest assured, they have not even seen a computer. So, for a UPSC aspirant, the reason, the trend is quite important, but the way forward is equally important. Now, herein lies 2 to 3 very standard arguments which can be pushed, knowing that the impact of all of these issues is on employment, is on healthcare, is on the idea that even the people who have no idea about computers will be financially excluded, with all banks having a certain app or a certain interface. We are creating a lot of issues, not just for us, but for the future of India itself. First way forward is primary, secondary and school level interventions, wherein we have to make sure that we create through these schemes infrastructure is in place and the teachers are in place. Here we have to incentivize their teaching, we have to incentivize becoming a teacher, we have to incentivize people going to rural India, and therein infrastructure needs to be in place. Second, we need to address this rural and urban divide by making sure that we have schemes which don't just give this education to the urban sector, but to the rural sector also. So schemes and government policy have to pivot and have to be towards rural India also. At the same point of time, we also have to address the regional issues, wherein there has to be prioritization within the federal structure, that we also give the state, for example Assam, a more what we call as bigger outlay or a better runway or a better plan rather than for Kerala. It again has to be this very important word, one size fits all approach won't work. We need a ground up understanding rather than a down up, or what we call as up down understanding, wherein we have to make the states tell us what they want rather than the center deciding for the state itself. So down up, up down. So the approach has to be perfect. Now how can UPSC ask you a question on this? They can give you a question like this, which is, in this digital age, computer literacy is a prerequisite to employment, healthcare and services. Discuss the above statement in the context of disparities in computer literacy in India. In this, if you have not gone through this article, you will never be able to write any answer because you have no idea what are the metrics. So here in the introduction, you have to talk about the recent development or this article basic data that in 2021 finally the number has become 24.7%. But then you have to talk about in the body the three axes of disparity, as it's saying disparities in computer literacy. So you'll talk about the age, you'll talk about the regional and urban rural, and then because you have to talk about how this is a prerequisite, you have to also answer the first part of the question. You will conclude by saying that in this age, if you don't have computer literacy, employment, healthcare services, all these things get impacted. So it is important that we have a way forward can come here in the form of a down up approach and the idea of a primary level understanding or intervention in that regard. So I hope that you will be able to answer this question now. These are type of articles which really matter. You will not find this in standard books. All this data is irrelevant for you generally, but the conclusion is important. Learn to use the data in the paper effectively. You don't have to learn each and every percentage, rather the trend is more important for us. Something which I've been emphasizing for the past 2 weeks, which is sometimes you have to know the trends, not the exact data. Can't learn that for an examination like this. Okay, now we move to the second article, which is on the concept of climate agenda and the next 5 years being very, very important. Now, this article talks about two basic heads. One, how India has changed, and second, what should be India's approach now, where he's given three very interesting concepts, which is go higher, go wider, go deeper. We'll discuss that. What does that mean? Now, the first thing which this article points out is that India as a nation has transformed itself quite a lot when it comes to climate agenda. From a very hesitant partner, from a hesitant participant, India is now becoming the voice and also a driver of the climate agenda. Now, how is that? There are multiple examples of this, wherein the foremost and the most important is the ISA, which is International Solar Alliance. International Solar Alliance, that way, is quite significant because this was India and France's joint idea to develop a certain what we call as international organization, which is based in Gurugram, which basically brings all the countries which are in solar surplus and also make sure that solar energy should be incentivized, adopted and also in a way spread across the global south. Here the numbers are also quite encouraging. From the 105 or 106 members which have signed the International Solar Alliance agreement, close to 86 of them have also ratified, which is a good number of countries to create in the global south a certain alliance which is based on a specific idea, which is solar power is the future, and countries in Africa, countries in the Southeast Asian sector and also countries in America, therefore South America and North America both, they can actually create a certain regime in which solar power is incentivized. That way, International Solar Alliance was a masterstroke, a very interesting and very important leadership initiative which India took. Other than that, we have other what we call as initiatives also. One is called the CDRI, which is based on disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction. Then we also have the Global Biofuel Alliance, and generally India is going to also host the COP, the Conference of Parties to UNFCCC in 2028 as of right now. That has been decided. Now, when it comes to the CDRI, the idea was to make sure that there is increased awareness about disasters with extreme weather events and extreme weather becoming very common. There has to be a knowledge system where everybody understands those extreme weather events. They are committed and all stakeholders are aligned, and further there is capabilities and capacity to withstand it. So from government policy to risk identification to capacity building to the idea of recovery and reconstruction, finance and community awareness, this CDRI mission actually tries to bring everybody together and produce a certain, again, a regime, a sector or an understanding where we all understand disaster and its risk and the extreme weather events in that regard. At the same point of time, the Global Fuel Alliance is also, Biofuel Alliance, that was quite important because it was one of the products at G20 where India again spearheaded what we call as a membership, a certain body which would take biofuel in India and across the world forward. Biofuel, specifically ethanol blending into petrol, is the future, and in America there's already a certain percentage which happens. In India also there's a certain percentage which happens, and India's fuel potential when it comes to ethanol blending could be very big. So biofuels, even in the aviation sector, are now a norm, and therefore when it comes to E20, we use mostly in India right now E10 fuel, but E20 fuel, which is with higher levels of ethanol blending, could be the future. And this also is an India driven initiative. So India has changed from an hesitant partner to a partner which basically is trying to push the world towards the right direction when it comes to climate agenda. India has been quite vocal with regards to the Green Climate Fund, about climate financing, the fact that greener energy and greener path needs more money, so the finances have to come through. Technology transfer is very, very important, and India has always argued about what is called the common but differentiated responsibilities. That is quite significant and important that way, that everybody has a common responsibility but differential and differentiated responsibility, where developing countries like India cannot pay the cost for the pollution which was done or the number of billions of carbon which was added into the atmosphere by the industrial powers, specifically Europe and North America. Now, once this article establishes that India is now becoming a global partner, a global voice in that regard, now the agenda needs to change, and the next 5 years are going to be quite critical for India's position as a certain voice and a actor across the climate landscape. Now, there are three words which you can use in the examination also, which is used categorically. One is go higher, then is go wider, and the third is go deeper. This is the mantra which the article gives, which is under these three, the Indian agenda can be pushed further. Now, what do you mean by go higher? Under go higher, what he is meaning is rather India's global leadership in climate action. What the article argues is that when it comes to consensus at the global scale, specifically for climate change, we are going to have the COP in 2028. However, to develop a consensus, for example, how we developed it in G20, needs at least 4 to 5 years. So India has to step up right now, has to go to a higher level of leadership so that it can bring all the actors together with regards to climate financing, with regards to biofuel, with regards to renewable energy, with regards to the climate agenda itself. So the word which is important is go higher, leadership. When it says go wider, therein lies, see, India has already committed quite a lot, which is, it says by 2070, it will be net zero. That is India's nationally determined goal, the NDC, nationally determined contributions. That was, India has argued that it will try to make sure that India becomes a net zero, which means that the production or the carbon production is matched by carbon sequestration, which is sinks are created, or we are in a way on such a path that our net emissions are zero, that we are able to sequester, which is basically take out the carbon out of the atmosphere and make it into repositories, which is called carbon sinks. So for example, the best carbon sink is a tree. It takes a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere via the CO2, gives out oxygen also, but also becomes a repository of carbon. That is why burning of forests is when the carbon sinks are burned and a lot of carbon is added into the atmosphere. So when it comes to go wider, the idea is very simple, that we have to communicate better, we have to adopt and expand our sectorial goals. So the wider aspect is about sectorial goals, which is the sectorial goal as of right now, which is the most important, is power. Mostly power, and the automobile sector is something which everybody targets. But the go wider concept is that power should not just be the most important sector. We have to adopt and expand our sectorial goals in order to take other sectors also. So we need to have a wider approach in the economy. So when it comes to our economic development, every sector should have a green approach. And this has been linked up with the next one, which is from higher to wider to deeper, which is the concept of federalism. The argument is that India has to make sure that states play an important role. So the NDCs, or this net 2070 net zero, cannot be achieved if the states do not commit to the same. So every state should have a certain vision and path that it will become net zero by 2070. And therefore, in our federal structure, from competitive to cooperative, it should also be a certain relationship in which we all are aligned. The central and the state agenda is aligned, because the center alone can't do it. The states have to contribute, will have to contribute, obviously, in order to become 2070 net zero. So this is a very interesting article and gives you a lot of things to be written as way forward, or what is the conclusion. This is how a newspaper becomes important. Newspapers give you a lot of material to write in the examination. For any main student, this is critical, that you are able to, or who's writing the mains this time, you have to make sure that you are using these words. It shows to the examiner also that you have better answers than anyone else, because everybody is going to write the same points. if you are going to use these terminologies, if you are able to make mind maps, it may be able to create a better impression, and that 1 or 2 mark is going to make the difference between clearing and also becoming a topper. 1 to 2 marks is basically 3 to 10 ranks in that regard. So do make sure that you are using this as a way of learning something but also putting it on paper. Now, how can UPSC ask you a question? They can ask you a question like this. India is emerging as an important voice and driver of climate change agenda. Elucidate. Now, elucidate means you have to give examples, and the examples you cannot give if you don't understand this article, wherein in the introduction you have to talk about the climate agenda also getting bogged down, too many disagreements, but in the body thereafter you can always argue that we are emerging with regards to ISA, with regards to global biofuel, with regards to the CDRI project, and more than that, in order to make sure that our voice and our force becomes even more higher, we need to go for go higher, go wider, and go deeper. So you can use these words in the conclusion to get that extra mark, which is make or break. Now with this, we enter a very interesting from the archives. Now this is a feature which I take whenever I take CNA, which is the concept of a certain article which was published 50 years ago under the Hindu, and this shows you the level at which things haven't changed, or also gives you a certain continuity or historical understanding. Now this article actually talks about a certain seizure which happened on or in the Indian airport at Delhi airport, which is a certain worm was found which was coming from Australia. These are thread-like millions of worms which was seized at the Delhi airport itself, and these worms are what are called as invasive species. The article argues that 13 huge crates of these worms, which most probably were going to be used for pest control or something like that, if they had not been burnt and destroyed in the Delhi crematorium, would have destroyed the Indian soil. Thousands of acres of crop would have been destroyed, stunned our crop development itself, and in a way it talks about how there is certain sabotage attempt which was being done over India's agriculture. As it is 1974, the Green Revolution now starting to show a lot of its important impacts and positive growth. Our food security was something which was always a problem till the 70s, and therefore this article talks about how invasive species can be too dangerous. Now this gives me a starting point or an entry point into the concept of invasive species. What is an invasive species, and is this the last time that invasive species were ever introduced in India, and what are the ways it is done? How do you mitigate it? Now when we talk about invasive species, there are 3 very important parameters which are used. Not every species, see, any species which is non-native or non-indigenous to that ecology or ecotone or biome, whatever you want to call it, specifically it is in the ecosystem of a specific country, then it is considered an invasive species. But not every species which is introduced is invasive. For example, tomato, potato, all were plants which were introduced by the Portuguese in India, but they were not invasive. Now, how do we say that it is a species which is invasive? Now, for example, a species A and a species B, a worm and a frog, was brought in by mistake into India. Now, what happens is A becomes an invasive species, destroys the crop, destroys the ecosystem of one of our what we call as wetlands. It starts to reproduce too quickly. It becomes a species which we have to basically kill. But B is not something which becomes a threat. Now, what is the difference between A and B, and how does it become an invasive species? See, if it can reproduce quickly, if it competes within the ecosystem, then it is considered a what we call as species which is an invasive species. The idea is, if it can reproduce quickly, for which it have to adapt quickly, if it is able to do that, which is very quickly adapt to the environment, reproduce quickly and compete within the ecosystem, then it is an invasive species. Now, invasive species that ways can destroy the native species, can even become a specific zone in a certain ecosystem, then can also become a mainland assemblage, which is in biodiversity they can destroy an island, but they can also destroy a whole ecosystem, and they can also then after go for the endemic species. For example, there's a specific type of frog which is there in that wetland. Now this invasive species comes through and it will then destroy the food chain and the native endemic species. Endemic means it is native to that ecosystem in natural habitat. That natural habitat will be overpowered by that invasive species, and therefore the endemic animal itself will be removed out or made extinct. Invasive species can be quite dangerous that ways, because they can just change the whole ecosystem, the whole natural habitat in such a way that the food chain can be destroyed and disrupted in any way or form. That ways invasive alien species are dangerous, because they can these non-native species which can reproduce at a much higher rate can therefore overpower endemic species. Now, how do these species spread or come? First is travel. In most cases it is travel, it is accidental. The Australian case which is covered is not accidental, that was a sabotage attempt. It is that you go to a certain country and thereafter by mistake you get, for example, a certain bug or a certain worm or a certain species of insect is attached to your traveling luggage or somehow enters into your what we call as containers and all, and through that it enters into India. If not properly scanned, it will lead to invasive species spreading. That is why in America and even in India, when you come to T3, when you come to international airports, they will ask you what fruits you have, because if you do not have the right endemic fruits, they will actually make you seize or rather take that fruit and they will destroy it. Any form of food item which is not endemic to India or to that country, they will destroy it. Even milk they will check in that regard. The second one is ships and boats. Here there's a certain saying that ships have ballast. Ballast is basically they take a lot of water in their lower half so as to balance the ship itself. These ballasts which are there in the hull itself, which is basically to balance the ship, and they'll take up the water, for example, from India, and they would have to travel to America. So when they reach America, in order to in a way come back, ballast water is released so that the weight of the ship can be taken properly, and they can now refill up water according to the weight of the containers. Mostly it is believed that the ballast water which is released in America or released in India or at ports, they have a lot of species which are not endemic to that sector, non-native to that sector, and most of the invasive species spread through ballast water of ships. You can also have migration, climate based, what we call as a certain push factor out of a certain natural habitat. It will then migrate and then come into a certain backyard or a certain space where you have gardening. You could also accidentally buy species of plants which are it can be plants and animals both. It can be a plant which is non-native to that sector. You bought it, for example, from a place where it is very endemic, but it is not endemic in your sector, and you could introduce it also. Also, in multiple cases, in order to kill a certain rat or certain insect, you can also bring in pest control measures in which you bring an invasive species. But if you don't control the invasive species reproduction, it can then go out of hand and create a lot of problems for you. Now, have there been invasive species in India in the past 15 years? Yes. Multiple such episodes have been noted since 2004, where from the bug on cotton to papaya to eucalyptus to tomato to even the what we call as whitefly to coffee to the army worm was in the news quite a lot recently in 2018-2019. You have the onion weed and the recent, which is the double glee, which impacts wheat. All of this impacts our food security, because what happens is that these invasive species destroy our food crop or cash crop in that regard. I've given you this. You will find the PPT in the Telegram channel, for which the link is given in the description box. You can use this as a way of writing answer. These are the examples when invasive species actually became a problem for India, and this is the history of that. But ironically, this article tells you that this goes 50 years back. In 1974 also, we had an issue of certain invasive species being transported across the world. So a very interesting article that ways, and you can get a very standard GS paper 3 type question environment. What are invasive species? What are the way we can mitigate their introduction? So here the argument is going to be, if you can mitigate any of these, which is travel, you are screening, ballast water is treated, you are not buying things, you making sure that habitats are in a way controlled, and pest control does not bring in certain things. If you can write the counter argument, you will automatically get the answer to this question. That was an easy one, but a realistic one. Now, 3 articles, simple, straightforward. First, related to the PLI scheme. Now, I don't know how much you're introduced to PLI. PLI is not something new. It is called Production Linked Incentive Scheme. The basics of Production Linked Incentive Scheme is that there are 2 goals. One is increase domestic production. The other one is import substitution, which is that you produce what you're importing, and in the end promote exports. So it's basically a certain space in which, or a scheme in which they try to do all 3 things together: increase domestic production, import substitution, substitute the goods with domestic goods, and also promote exports. And the way they do it is, it's like a cashback scheme which is called PLI, Production Linked Incentive. The name itself is quite explanatory. The government gives certain targets in the next 5 years if the producer, be it an Indian or a foreign producer, if that company can meet a certain production target in that year, there is 4 to 6% incentive on the production value of the output incrementally, which is, first you will get a certain 4 to 6% subsidy at, for example, 100 tons, then you will get it at 200 tons and at 300 tons. And there are also clauses which says that out of what has been produced, certain percentage should be exported. So just to give you a certain understanding, for example, in the Production Linked Incentive Scheme for large scale electronic manufacturing, the idea was 4 to 6% incremental sales. They will create a base year. Okay, you were doing 100 tons. Now if you will touch 150 tons, we will give you 4 to 6%. And thereafter, if you touch 300 tons, we'll give you again incrementally from base year 4 to 6%. So base year amount is created, and then they create incremental sales targets. If you meet them, production linked incentive. So you get basically cashbacks when you meet a certain amount of production. It is in the phone segment, and this was the first segment in which they introduced it. But 5-year tenures are created, and it is about incremental investment, sales and export. So the government can give you targets also that out of this 150 tons, 20 tons should be exported. So you're exporting, you're doing import substitution, and you're doing production in India also. This is where India is trying to make Indian government is trying to make India a manufacturing hub, which is that we are giving you incentives to come here, certain tax breaks also, so that you can produce in India. So it is Make in India initiative. It is PLI has turned out to be a very, very important backbone, a scheme which is working, but there is a roadblock which they have to cross with regards to manufacturing. Now, a very standard question which can come in the examination, prelims examination, is what are the sectors in which PLI has been pushed in. So PLI that way was introduced initially in just the electronics sector, but today from battery to electronics and technology production, automobile, pharmaceutical, telecom, textile, food production, solar, white goods, AC, LEDs, steel, further mobile manufacturing, key materials and drug intermediaries, and medical devices, all are under the PLI scheme. So these are already notified sectors. These are sectors in which there is already a PLI scheme outlay which is there, and therefore this much amount of money the government is going to give as incentives to the companies if they meet their targets and make India a manufacturing hub in that sense. Now, for you, the article gives you a certain problem which has recently emerged. The problem is that with a lot of tariff on the intermediary good or on the goods, input goods, what is happening is PLI gains are getting nullified. So there's a lot of high tariff on a lot of electronic item input that in turn is leading to PLI getting diluted. So what the Commerce Ministry has pitched is to reduce the high tariffs on imports of inputs for electronic and other sectors, so that the PLI scheme remains an incentive and attractive to the corporate sector in that sense. So this is the backstory. This is the what we call as the concept of static, but something new which has recently also happened. In the examination, they can ask you this question. You will write the answer to this question in the chat box. You have to, which is consider the following sectors: food products, manufacturing of medical devices, textiles. Which of the above the PLI scheme has been introduced? Only one, only two, all of them, none. You will write the answer to this question in the chat box. This is the way PLI can be asked as a prelims question in that regard. The second last topic is also related to exports only, something which is quite discouraging, which is a lot of the importers are now choosing air freight rather than the sea routes because of port congestions, container costs and freight costs going up. What has been pointed out is that there has been close to 10 days to 15 days, a fortnight, where there is a container shortage in India, wherein the recent delays in port allocation of certain what we call as docking areas, and even there's a tea container which has been actually talked about. Indian Tea Exporters Association argued that 10 days a container has been kept because there's nobody to take it off the ship also. So they're rather going for airlifting of goods, but this is not something good. This is basically gives you an example or gives you fodder to write the issues in export sector. And the biggest as of right now is that we don't have the infrastructure to take the freight volume in that regard. This has to be sorted, and therein we have to build more ports, we have to build more facilities. But as of right now, our exporters are actually getting hurt by the congestion at our ports with regards to freight handling. This is not something encouraging, this is actually problematic, and this is only a certain red flag which I give you, and you can just use this as a way of writing into a GS paper 3 answer, issues with the export sector. The last is the environment discussion with regards to the gharial. Now, somehow the forest department and the Kaziranga National Park and Tiger Reserve authorities don't know how one female gharial has entered into the reserve along with the Brahmaputra in that regard. Gharials were known in this sector, but over a period of time they became either extinct or the spotting was very rare. It is believed that it is a female gharial, so there is a chance that if a male gharial is introduced, gharials can thereafter be reintroduced, and the way this sector or this ecozone or this what we call as ecosystem can get the gharial back, maybe through this female gharial. Now for you, the process doesn't really matter. What is going to happen, we'll have an update on this. What matters to you is this: the 3 crocodiles of India. First the gharial, second one is the saltwater crocodile, third is called the magar crocodile. Now gharials have that very specific what we call a snout. They have a very specific snout which makes them very easy to spot that way. And when it comes to their habitats, mostly in coastal sectors, but the numbers of gharials are quite low, 650 globally, and that way the reason why they are critically endangered under IUCN is because of this only. So for you, what matters is the IUCN status, what matters is their marker, and the fact that it is important that gharial gets the space in order to make sure that we can introduce in Kaziranga gharials also. So this gave me an opportunity to discuss with you the INCA status, a species which is critically endangered. Always do remember the critically endangered and other crocodile species in India also. So in the past 1 hour, we've discussed from education to computer literacy to the aspects related to climate change, to the concept of what we call as PLI scheme and export issues, and the concept of invasive species. Now, before I end, just a small reminder and announcement for you, wherein the conclave of visionary leaders, the Unacademy UPSC Summit, is going to happen now on 20th and 21st of July. You can register for this. We have very illustrious speakers who are going to tell you about what is the future of India, what is the vision for India, from Shri Nitin Gadkari to Annamalai to an additional DG, ADG. That ways they will share their experiences of the government, of the services, and this could be enlightening for you. This is in association with the Hindu, and I hope that you will become a part of this. So educators, speakers, and a lot of very important personalities who are voices today will be a part of this. So I hope you will also become a part of this in that regard. With this, I would like to end this session. Thank you so much for your patience. I will see you in the next session. Take care. Bye-bye.